Well, good morning, everybody. This is Jessie Ettinger with Social Policy Research Associates and the, what are we calling ourselves? The Technical Assistance Team for the California Apprenticeship Initiative. This is our December webinar, and this month we're talking about expanding apprenticeship models in emerging sectors. So I just wanted to, do a brief introduction. I'll be moderating a panel of some really great guest speakers today. But I just wanted to talk a little bit about, why we're doing this webinar today. And one of the explicit goals of CAI is to make sure that in California, we're not just growing apprenticeship opportunities, but making sure that these opportunities for good paying, high skilled jobs are really available to everyone. And I think we can see that through a lot of the investments made in pre-apprenticeship and also the explicit call in the RFAs to make sure that these opportunities were reaching into communities that maybe had not been traditionally able to access apprenticeship. So there's great work happening all over the state to recruit and support diverse apprentices and pre-apprentices. And I just want to acknowledge that work. And then talk about another lens for creating access to opportunity. And that's to think about ways in which apprenticeship is or isn't accessible to people with disabilities, and maybe think about some of the opportunities to reach out to people with disabilities as well as the partners that serve them in order to build stronger apprenticeship programs and pre-apprenticeship programs. Over the last year, the CAI Technical Assistance Team has presented a couple workshops on thinking about how apprenticeship can be more inclusive. In May 2018 at our CAI lab in Sacramento, Caleb did a great workshop on universal design and thinking about how incorporating universal design principles into apprenticeship design doesn't just make them more accessible for people with disabilities, but can make them more accessible, period, and oftentimes a stronger, better designed program. So that was really a fun presentation. And then in September, we did a webinar with the California Department of Rehabilitation. And from a sustainability point of view and also from a partnership point of view, we really want to make sure that CAI grantees are thinking about the Department of Rehabilitation as a potential partner. They serve youth and young adults with disabilities as well as older adults. And they have resources to support those trainings and those transitions to employment. And I won't get into all the wonky WIOA updates. I'll let Caleb talk about that later. But there are some real opportunities, I think, to partner with your local vocational rehabilitation agencies. So I'm just putting a plug in for that as well. So what brings us to our webinar today is this past fall, the U.S. Department of Labor's Office of Disability Employment Policy initiated a project to study apprenticeship programs that were specifically working to serve youth and young adults with disabilities. And Social Policy Research Associates, which is the company that Caleb and I work with, we are leading a team who will be supporting that effort. Our partners include Jobs for the Future and Ethos Strategic Consulting, who are our panelists today. And the goal of this project is to select and support 3 to 4 sites that are doing a pilot of engaging people with disabilities in an apprenticeship program. And we want to study what they're doing as well as provide technical assistance to help them build stronger programs. And so it's a really exciting project, and I'm not going to go too into the weeds about it today, mostly because I want to get to our panel. So our panelists today are two staff from Ethos Strategic Consulting, Josh Christensen and Corinne Wiebel, and they are our partners on the project, and they also bring a really specific and interesting lens on workforce and working with people with disabilities. And then also my colleague Caleb Van Docto, who many of you on the CAI project already know. Before Caleb came to SPR and became deeply engaged in the world of workforce and apprenticeship, he was actually a teacher for people with the blind and very connected to a lot of the resources I was talking about earlier in terms of engaging with the Department of Rehabilitation. And I know that those introductions did not do anybody justice, but I was mostly excited to get into our panel. And maybe before I do that, I just will let all of the panelists introduce themselves and maybe give a little bit more background. So Josh, if you're on, do you want to maybe introduce yourself and Ethos a little bit better than I did?
Sure, and thank you to Jesse and Caleb for having us on. I'll do a brief background. I'm Josh Christensen. I have a background for many years working with young people around diversity and inclusion, mostly in the education sector, with a little bit of workforce development in there. After that, I made a jump to consulting, management consulting, and worked with Deloitte in their federal practice, and I was in what they call their human capital sector. So I worked with federal agencies around issues of talent, leadership, any people issues in the federal government was there, and was there a few years before I joined up Ethos, which is a strategic consulting firm which does a lot of different work, often with the federal sector, and is why we're here is some of our work we've been doing for the past 4 years with the Department of Labor, which is one of the hats we wear called PEAT, Partnership on Employment and Accessible Technology, and we'll talk a little bit more about that later, but that's how we got involved in this exciting new inclusive apprenticeship opportunity.
Excellent. And then Corinne, are you on as well?
I am, thank you. I'm Corinne Weibel. I'm the Deputy Project Director for PEAT, the initiative Josh just mentioned, the Partnership on Employment and Accessible Technology. My background is also education-based. I did a lot of training and technical assistance for the National Council for History Education earlier in my career, and also worked with public libraries to make their programming more inclusive and accessible to everybody in the community. So very excited to be a part of this project too, especially since it is so related to workforce and accessibility issues, obviously.
Yes, and thank you guys both for joining us this morning. Caleb, do you also want to do a brief introduction and tell some of our grantees a little bit about what you did before you became a WIOA and apprenticeship expert?
Sure, yeah, thanks, Jesse. Good to chat. Obviously, we are colleagues at Social Policy Research Associates here in Oakland, California, and I'm glad to be working on this project. Prior to being here, I ran programs for an organization here in Oakland that provides services to the blind and visually impaired called Lion Center for the Blind. And so I served both as a teacher, but also as I got further in my career, ended up taking over several of the programs, including assistive technology trainers, independent living instructors, orientation mobility instructors, Braille instructors, and then I also guided and ran employment programs, and we worked in partnership with California's VR agency, which is the Department of Rehabilitation, and then I've also worked in partnership with several agencies that serve the blind and visually impaired across the country over the last decade or so. And then even before that, I did work with the Veterans Administration in Palo Alto, and then also worked in special ed classrooms and such around the Bay Area here in San Francisco.
All right, thank you. Okay, so let's dive in. Let's set the stage. Let's start by talking more about some of the advantages and opportunities to making apprenticeships more accessible generally. So Corinne and Josh, do you want to start by talking about your experiences helping employers make workplaces more accessible and how that might have provided any competitive or strategic advantages?
Sure. So there are many reasons a company may want to move towards making their workplace accessible, and especially we're talking about technology. So just to level set things for most people, we're talking about websites, software, any digital platforms. So when we talk about accessibility, there is the physical aspect, but our specialty is also really making sure that technology is accessible so that people can do their job and do it well, That could be anything from time and attendance, to obviously creating documents digitally. And so we're really focused on the digital realm. So many competitive advantages. I'll name a few that I think might be relevant. First and foremost, right now in this labor market, for employers, it's hard to find talent. There are lots of people that are employed that want to be employed, and so they don't have as big a pool to choose from traditionally, and so unfortunately, many Americans that are disabled, they are at a lower employment rate, and so being accessible and open, you're just broadening your talent pool. Number one is what we tell employers. They're just going to broaden their talent pool, have many more candidates and more options and opportunities to choose from. Other differentiators I might highlight here is just for some people just looking to separate themselves as a company, using the best, latest, most inclusive technology is appealing to lots of people, especially younger generations, the millennials and the Generation Z or whatever the latest one is, have proven that they really want a company that's inclusive, and that is shown and gone to digital as well. So for a company using that, it's not just about attracting people with disabilities, it's about attracting all talent, and having an accessible platform could definitely do that. One more I might plug is just that it's the best design. If you're using accessible technology, it's the simplest, cleanest, most usable technology. We oftentimes, instead of say accessible technology, we say usable, because it really is what makes, whether it's a website or a platform or some kind of software you're using, what makes it the simplest, easiest to use as a person is accessible design. And so that would be one of my final points.
Yeah.
Corinne, did you have anything to add before we move on?
Sure. Well, one I would say is that there's a lot of research out there showing that it does pay for businesses to embrace these best practices. Accenture actually came out with a big report this fall called Getting to Equal, and they found that companies that make this a priority earn 28% higher revenue, double the net income, and 30% higher economic profit margins than their peers, which is huge, and that's not the only study we've seen like this. So there's that. And I also wanted to circle back because I feel like we may not have actually defined what we're talking about when we're talking about accessible technology.
Yeah.
And I think like when people hear the word accessibility, they tend to think in terms of physical environments, which totally makes sense. So accessible technology is different from assistive technology. Assistive technology might be something specific that an individual uses to connect to technology. The classic example is a screen reader, which is used by someone, often someone who's blind, to navigate the web. But they can't do that unless the website has been designed in a way that the screen reader can read it. And so one of the easiest ways to think about is if you're thinking about designing a building that's accessible, you're going to make hallways that are wide enough, and doorways that are wide enough. But the person is going to continue to use a wheelchair, say, to enter the building. So somebody is still using their technology. We're talking about just making the system itself accessible so that it is compatible with what everybody needs to be as productive as possible.
Okay, thanks, Corinne. Those are impressive statistics, and also thank you for sort of defining the difference between assistive and accessible technology. So Caleb, I have a follow-up question for you. Having worked closely with people with disabilities before and now being immersed in apprenticeship models, can you talk about some of the reasons you think apprenticeship is a particularly good model or opportunity for combining these two worlds of workforce where there's just a lot of great work happening?
Yeah, absolutely. So I guess we should start a little bit with the educational background that I think all of us are familiar with going through elementary school, high school, et cetera. And, in common traditional academic pathways, we are used to sitting in a classroom, maybe the teacher instructing something on the board. If we're learning science, if we're learning, biology or whatnot, they might describe some sort of biological process. And then, if we're fortunate enough to have good resources in our school district, we might get a little bit of time with some in-classroom hands-on experience with something, with dissecting a frog or something like that, right? It might be like a traditional experience. Apprenticeship emphasizes much more hands-on and applied learning experience. So there's still that classroom component, but there's a great majority of the effort is on the hands-on learning and the applied learning in the workplace, and it's usually working in a situation where you are actually producing, you are actually contributing to the employer that you're partnered with. And when it comes to teaching, especially for individuals with disabilities, there is a lot of literature and a lot of research that goes into how to alter curricula in the school setting so that it might be accessible to somebody who is not, say, a visual learner, or somebody who is, learns in a different way. Different people learn through tactile activities, people learn through hands-on activities. Sometimes it's easier for folks to have things explained to them versus having, and then getting to try something out. Others like to just dive right in. Apprenticeship really gives a greater bandwidth for the types of learning that people can do, which is, speaks to, I think, Corinne's point of having accessible sorts of systems set up to support people. There's multiple ways for people to get the information, ingest the information, understand it, and then apply it back to themselves. It's actually a primary principle of universal design, setting up systems to work that way. And something else I would also mention about apprenticeship too, a key component of apprenticeship is mentorship, having somebody that's there with you to actually help guide you as you learn different aspects of working on a job or accomplishing a task as you go along. And certainly that is a valuable resource really for anybody in a classroom, but it's a common practice that's used certainly in special education, certainly with individuals who may have learning disabilities or even a certain amount of dyslexia or other intellectual disabilities. Oftentimes there will be supportive tutoring that's made available in an academic setting. There may be even as much as having like a support teacher or a classroom teacher providing a little bit of extra guidance to a student who is working on a particular subject in a classroom. Apprenticeship, the model of apprenticeship brings a lot of these well-used and well-understood elements of adapting a classroom so that everybody can learn and succeed. We're doing it in a workplace setting, and we're doing it in a way where everybody has the opportunity to succeed at accomplishing a job that they're interested in, and perhaps learn it in different ways. It's multimodal learning. So it really reflects the sorts of work that's happening for individuals with disabilities academically as well.
That's awesome. So Josh and Corinne, I just want to circle back to you. Did anything Caleb say spark anything more that you wanted to say about the advantages or opportunities to making apprenticeship more accessible?
Yeah, I think we're okay for now.
No, given the other stuff we need to cover, I definitely appreciate all the answers.
Excellent.
But I think it's good to go.
All right, great. So we've talked about how there's this competitive advantage to thinking about making workplaces more accessible. We've talked about how we're having this moment where apprenticeship might be a particularly good model or vehicle given some of its structural elements. And so now let's talk about policy. We're having a moment, I would say, in workforce policy where I think there's a lot of support for both apprenticeship and for accessibility, especially under the Workforce Innovation and Opportunity Act. So Caleb, I'll start with you. You've been up to your ears in a WIOA implementation study that SPR is also engaged in right now. on top of your work with CAI. So can you talk briefly, let's do a high-level summary about how the aspects of the Workforce Innovation Opportunity Act support connections between apprenticeship and serving people with disabilities?
Yeah, absolutely. So as I imagine at least many of us on the call know, having worked with the California Apprenticeship Initiative, that Voc Rehab, Department of Rehabilitation, is a core partner of WIOA and the Workforce Act. So the DOR is currently partnering with the Title I providers, the workforce system, the adult education, the AFLA partners or Title II, employment services, Title III through Wagner-Peiser. And all of these partners now have the same measures for success that they are documenting, the common measures that they are documenting to demonstrate success in the participants or the consumers that they are serving through their systems. Apprenticeship is a approach to helping individuals find meaningful, sustainable work that hits many of the common measures. It's going to hit the credential attainment measure because apprenticeship comes with industry recognized credentials. It's going to hit the measurable skills gain requirements because apprenticeship has progressive annual increases in expertise and performance and pay as people move through the system itself. And then, of course, apprenticeship leads to well-paying jobs in a variety of sectors and industries. As a matter of fact, those are growing right now. They're moving. We're seeing more coming from tech and from healthcare, not just from the building trades and from construction. And so the efforts that Voc Rehab, departments of rehabilitation across the country are pooling their resources and moving towards opportunities for people with disabilities to engage in the workforce systems in ways that they haven't done so traditionally. And part of that comes with partnering with the workforce systems, the apprenticeship systems that have been operating through Department of Labor here in California. The Department of Apprenticeship Standards is supporting those efforts as well. And I do know, actually, we do know in California here, DAS just did a partnership training with the Department of Rehabilitation across the state as well. So they had DAS come out to each of the offices here at DOR and provided training to all of the frontline counselors and staff in each region on what constitutes apprenticeship, how to identify programs to help people get enrolled, what supports VR might be able to provide to help link their consumers into apprenticeship programs, and then where to connect with them through the one-stop centers, et cetera.
That's great. Oh, and one thing I would add, also just thinking about some of our work with local areas all over California, is that incorporating really specific plans for how local workforce boards are going to engage with their local DOR office is part of the WIOA plan updates that are coming. And so for those of you on the phone who are CAI grantees, as you know, we provide you guys updates with guidance that comes from the Employment Development Department. And so that is going to be part of some of the work happening locally. And for those of you colleges who are adult ed providers or school districts who might be linked in with some of your local WIOA planning, be on the lookout for how your local areas are planning to work with the Department of Rehabilitation, and it might present some interesting opportunities for your apprenticeship program or your pre-apprenticeship program. So I would throw that in as a specific California measure as well. So so that's exciting, and we are, you know, a little California-centric on this webinar. I know we have guests who are not CAI grantees who have joined us today, so I should have said a special welcome to you at the beginning. But maybe moving more broadly, so there, a lot of the focus that we have on CAI is thinking about sort of like what's in front of us, what is the Chancellor's Office saying about apprenticeship, how does the Employment Development Department and the Department of Apprenticeship Standards, how do those policies affect grantees and present opportunities. But I would now throw it back to Josh and Corinne, because I do think that part of this project that we're all engaged in for the Office of Disability Employment Policy, one of the goals is to influence policy. So I wanted to talk a little bit about the opportunities for the findings from this specific project that we're doing around pilot models of apprenticeship that serve people with disability.
Sure.
So can we talk a little bit about how this could influence policy?
We can, but first I have to give my plug around WIOA and accessibility, as we were discussing that in detail. I just want everyone to know that, you know, under the new, under WIOA, and there's a section in there, section 188, which is around non-discrimination and equal employment. It is that all American Job Centers need to be physically and programmatically accessible. And so that really gets at what we were talking about digital stuff. Any type of posting they have over the internet, any type of software, computers they use for folks, all of that stuff needs to be accessible and using accessible technology. We know that that is not necessarily the case when fighting with accessibility. It's an uphill battle, but I do want to make people aware that that is the expectation, and that through the project we do with Pete and the Office of Disability Employment Policy, we have resources for American Job Centers and WIOA. So I think we have a slide later with maybe with our web address, but I'll just plug it now. It's PeteWorks, PeatWorks.org, PeteWorks.org. And if you just typed in WIOA into the search box, you would find the various resources we have set up that can help American Job Centers understand what the expectations are and how to train your staff or get the information you need. So before we jumped into policy, I wanted to go there. Going back to your question, Jesse, around policy and the impact of this particular project, I mean, I think you noted at the onset the executive order that's come down that really is placing a huge emphasis on apprenticeships. And I think we've seen, you know, apprenticeships grow and grow over the past few years. Started under the previous administration, continued by this one. There's investment and funding there, and they're really trying to find the best way to get Americans into the jobs we need. There are specific funding streams for certain demographics around apprenticeships, be it women or veterans. And I think the pilot that, you know, we're helping to run is if we could find something that works really well, there may be something set up specifically for people with disabilities. I meant to note at the onset, disability is a really broad range, so not familiar with how the guests think of disability, but the most recent statistics say 1 in 4 Americans have or will live with a disability. And so this is really something that touches so many people, whether it's a temporary disability, whether it's you age and grow into one, or whether it's one you're living with and have lived with your whole life. Many, many Americans deal with disabilities. And so making sure our workforce is inclusive is, you know, really critical to the health of our country. So this particular initiative, you know, if we have some good findings, could have impacts on state level, similar to the California Apprenticeship Initiative, could definitely have implications on federal level as far as funding goes. And so we're looking forward to seeing what we can learn. As a final quick plug for policy, I'll just say we oftentimes think about policy with big P, kind of meaning the federal, state, local level, but also the small P. So we look to influence policy of organizations, of companies, of recruitment boards, thinking about the policies and systems in place within the organizations can have a big impact as well. And so we just like to think holistically, because we know, especially with accessible technology and finding an open and inclusive place for people with disabilities, it's a bit of an uphill battle. So we're trying to support and make way for that any way we can.
Yeah, that's a good point, Josh. And I know that a lot of our grantees are, by definition, or by the standards for the grant application, they're school districts and college districts. And so within those organizations, they probably have not only policies for inclusivity and accessibility, but also, I would guess, offices and experts in-house who can also help them understand some of the opportunities to leverage other services within their organizations. So at this point, you guys have done a great job selling the idea or explaining why apprenticeships and accessibility really go hand in hand, and just the terrific opportunity to learn and to grow apprenticeship in this way. But I think, and you guys have also done a good job of giving some specific examples, but let's talk about that a little bit more. Imagine that for a workforce program or a community college CTE program that had never thought about expanding to serve people, specifically people with disabilities, that this might sound a little daunting. So Josh and Corinne, this is a great opportunity you've talked a little bit about Pete, but maybe some of your specific work in assisting employers with the adoption of accessible technology, and maybe a little bit more about the kinds of technical assistance that you were able to offer and the kinds of things that they needed to learn about to make themselves more accessible.
Sure, absolutely. Up on screen, hopefully you can all see our infographic called Accessible Technology in the Employment Lifecycle. And this was one of the first things that we created when we started Pete about 5-6 years ago, because we really wanted to examine this issue, which has only become more pronounced with time, because I think everybody is aware of how pervasive technology is in really every part of society today. And that also includes the workforce, because every stage of having and keeping a job, even after retirement, technology is a really essential aspect of it. And that starts with just applying to a job. In fact, some of the first work we did was national research on whether it was difficult for people with disabilities to navigate online job application portals, which are increasingly, I think, 90% of jobs are now applied to online, and probably even more. So we did a lot of research on that, and we actually, a lot of, really all the work we do, we've tried to have as grassroots an approach as possible. So once we did the study, I think we found 43%, 46% of people with disabilities within the last year had either had difficulty or been unable to apply to a job because the application simply wasn't accessible for a lot of different kinds of people. So we created a resource called TalentWorks, which guides employers through every aspect of how to make their tools accessible. And that's everything from their websites to how they're posting on social media to recruit talent. There are all sorts of new technologies too coming out still. All sorts of artificial intelligence and machine learning tools that companies are using to sort and review like resumes automatically. And it's really important that all of that be done in a very inclusive way. So TalentWorks includes a lot of information about that. Another tool, and actually, Caleb, could you advance the slide? Because I think we have some of the tools listed on the next, yeah. There we go. So TalentWorks, I already discussed. Another thing that people told us over and over was that the process for working with vendors to determine if technology is accessible was really daunting. It's really difficult. It's one of these issues that's just very complex, in which you have to involve a lot of people, that don't necessarily have the same language for talking about things, because someone in HR or someone, you know, even an IT staff may not know exactly how to work with vendors who themselves don't understand what accessibility is, what the guidelines are, how to meet them. So this tool includes a lot of really useful information, everything from making the business case to people in the C-suite, which is often one of the most important steps for any organization when we're talking about lowercase policy. But also just sample contract language, what kinds of standards to help you yourself figure out what you need to comply with. Anyone receiving federal funding has to comply with Section 508, but often you want to aim a little higher than that too for various reasons. But that's important language to know when you're talking with your vendor about which accessibility standards and regulations you are trying to meet. We also have a great tool called Policy Matters, and that's actually the tool Josh was referencing before when he was talking about our resources for understanding obligations under WIOA. We also have a lot of really detailed analysis about other laws and regulations and standards.
Detailed analysis on our Apprentice, Josh, but plain language people. I'm not a policy person, and it is all very understandable.
Yes, that is an important clarification, because some of what we do is writing more detailed policy analysis, but we always, I mean, a real goal of the site is that everything is understandable to a very broad audience. This is a good place to find information about the Americans with Disabilities Act. It's often confusing because the ADA was written in 1990 when the internet really didn't exist in any recognizable form, but Department of Justice actually just reaffirmed this fall that digital accessibility is implicit in it, even if there are not specific regulations. And that can be really confusing because there's no specific discussion about how to make a website accessible under that definition in the text of the ADA. But it is included in the settlements they've made over the years, and we compiled nearly 200 to really pick out what companies need to keep in mind, and also the process that they should take to meet these metrics that are clearly the standards the Department of Justice is using. Another tool we have is TechCheck. This is a really simple benchmarking tool for any initiative, and it's a confidential 10-minute assessment that anyone can go through to get a sense of, are your staff trained in accessibility? You know, have you done X, Y, and Z to make your website accessible? Have you considered other tools in your workplace that people are using? And it gives you a score, and we've heard back from people that it's very useful actually for approaching upper management to have some hard data to show this is a problem, we need to fix it, and then people retake it a year later. They're able to show metrics on improvement for whatever reporting they need to do to justify that work.
And I would just add, some people have mentioned, she said it's helpful when to talk. Sometimes people that are pushing for accessibility in the workplace are an army of one. And this not only to give you the score and things to talk about, it's going to provide resources. So at different points along the way, depending on where you are in your kind of journey or the organization's journey, it will provide specific resources to give you information. And we've definitely heard back from people. It enabled them to go and talk to people about the importance of accessibility because it gave them the information they needed.
Yeah. In addition, I don't have an icon up here, but we have an overarching staff training tool, which goes into, it walks you through these tools, but also some other resources we have on the site. Probably one of the most visited is our area for training staff in the actual how-tos and how do you make a website accessible. For example, how do you write email? How do you create Word documents? How do you upload content into your content management system? Because those are things that really everybody in an organization needs to know how to do. And one of the strengths of the staff training tool is that it has different pathways mapped out for, you know, if you are an HR administrator, if you are the person that does social media, or if you are the lawyer in an organization, which pieces do you need to know? Because those are all very different from what somebody in the IT staff needs to know. And it's honestly, it's pretty simple, but you know, in a lot of cases, it's remembering to right-click on an image and add some alt text, or to use the header system in Microsoft Word. So awareness, over and over, awareness is the biggest issue, and like that we have to solve. Like, people just don't realize this is an issue. And a lot of that is why we're trying to work with a lot of different types of people, especially companies. You know, when something like Microsoft, I think it was last year, just put the accessibility checker next to the spell checker. Previously, you'd had to go into the menu and dig through to get to it. And that's really increased dramatically the number of people using it, and has made it so much easier for really everyone in the world to make their documents more accessible. There are all kinds of great stories like that we've been happy to see and report on.
And I would just add, all of these were developed out of a need and out of partnership. So if you see some resource that you're interested in, you don't have, please contact us. I'm not saying we're going to go make a resource, but we might. We also may help you just find the answer, even if we don't have the just right tool. So we encourage people to check out our website and contact us with any questions you have around accessible workplace technology.
Yeah, and we could talk about this all day, but the only thing I'll say is, like, probably the biggest issue we've heard about and have been interested in the last year or two has been emerging technology, things like artificial intelligence, autonomous vehicles, machine learning, virtual reality. So we're really, you know, those are literally the future of work. So we have a podcast series about that. It's a great place to keep track of those emerging issues. Yeah.
Well, I just want to say a big thank you to you guys for sharing these resources and developing them. A lot of our grantees, as I mentioned, they're working within educational institutions, so there's, you know, influencing some of the policy that happens there. But I also see, I think a lot of our grantees are serving the role of intermediary and really working with employers and community-based organizations to build these projects and to build these new partnerships and connections. And so, you know, as you all move forward in your project design, and a lot of, you know, this design is really in its infancy, having resources like these to check and benchmark your projects, I think could really benefit them from a sustainability point of view. So I just really want to put a plug in for thinking about some of this stuff and being an excellent resource, because I know a lot of you interface with employers in your role, and so being able to talk about these things, these seem like great resources. And then I do want to follow up with Caleb, and you know, Josh and Corinne, you did a great job of providing some really specific kinds of technical assistance and tools that are available. So Caleb, you've worked in California, you've worked closely with the Department of Rehabilitation, and then given your background, what would you say there are some specific resources that are available here in California, or some advantages to, you know, getting in touch with different entities that might be good partners?
Yeah, well, I mean, I think what Josh and Corinne are presenting here are excellent resources or starting points that employers could use, certainly, but I also think that there's resources for apprenticeship programs and pre-apprenticeship programs, and anyone who's designing training programs and work-based learning opportunities for people with disabilities. Quite frankly, for anybody, not just people with disabilities, could make use of these services. And there are other routes to finding this and other information as well. I know the the JAN network, and I'm spacing on the acronym right now, but I imagine that someone out there knows.
Job Accommodation Network.
Thank you. Job Accommodation Network is what I was thinking of. Also has tons and tons of resources. I know in the blind, visually impaired areas of disability, there's a lot of reliance on things like AEA, and also the NFB, the National Foundation for the Blind. I also wanted to just kind of follow up on a couple of the points that sort of reinforce the tools that both PeteWorks has out there and available, and some of these other resources as well, which is, you know, we were having, matter of fact, Jesse and I, had conversations recently with apprenticeship coordinators here in California, and we were asking, you know, what makes a good apprentice, or, you know, how do you identify someone who's likely to not only do well on the job, but stick through it for the full length of a program? And what we've heard is that, you know, a good apprentice is not necessarily the candidate that interviews the best or scores the highest on the entry exams, although those are useful tools, but it's the hardest worker. It's the one who is actively going out and proactively hustling or finding work that they can engage with on the work site. It's the individuals that have passion for the work. Building in programs from the start that have accessibility in mind actually open up the system, open up the educational opportunities for everybody. Not only does it make the programs compliant with 508, as Corinne discussed, but it opens up programs, pools of candidates for people that they can recruit. And it prepares programs for the changes that are coming in the workforce. We know that there is a low level of unemployment that we're registering. It's more challenging for employers and for programs to find viable candidates. And oftentimes those candidates do exist, but if they don't have a way to be able to effectively take the apprenticeship test or participate in the training programs or the pre-apprenticeship programs that get people in the door in the first place, then you never get access to them. And so having these tools in place, it's, you know, we certainly don't expect program directors and curriculum designers to think about every last little piece of accessibility and variability that a student may come with, but making use of tools like this, which have been designed and developed through professionals working in the space that are thinking about the variety of disabilities that are out there, means that you're prepared to find the types of candidates that are really going to be successful in your programs, and insulates you from the ups and downs of marketplaces when it becomes difficult to find and recruit really strong candidates. So those are a few of the resources, and then just some follow-up and backing on the value of these kinds of tools and what they can offer to programs as they design and register themselves. And of course, all of this fits, just to close that out, all of this just is reinforced by and supported by WIOA.
Excellent. So thank you all. And I have one more question that I could pursue, but I wanted to, I'm going to talk a little bit about follow-up, but first I wanted to put it out to our audience. If they have questions, they're welcome to enter questions into the Zoom group chat right now, while I talk a little bit about, you know, staying in touch and follow up for this project. So I just wanted to say, it looks like we don't have our contact slide at the end of this deck, but we will add it. And when we put the slides out to the CAI network, and when they go up on the PETE website, we will include a slide that includes our contact information for our CAI grantees who want to stay in touch and engaged in this project and what we learn. And really for our broader audience, as a technical assistance team for the Pathways to Accessible Apprenticeship program, we are looking to build a community of practice that includes not just the sites that we'll be studying that are engaging in apprenticeships that have accessible pathways to people with disabilities. We also know that there's a broader population of employers and education institutions and apprenticeship offices across the country that are really interested in what we're going to be learning. And so we do want to build out that community of practice. And so we will, when we put out these slides, have a way for you to stay in touch if you want to provide your email and maybe just let us know the level of information you're interested in receiving from us. We want to stay in touch. So I just wanted to put that out there. I'm watching the chat box. It looks like we haven't seen any questions come through yet. And maybe while you all are considering that, I would put out a last question. It's really more of a discussion point. And we've touched on this at several points in the presentation, but really disability covers a lot of different conditions, abilities, impairments. And knowing that, I wanted to know if any of the panelists wanted to give advice to our college and workforce grantees that are trying to understand how they might begin to tackle accessibility. Can you recommend partners or resources? And I know we just talked about some of the things available through Pete, but specifically in terms of sort of climbing that mountain. Caleb or Josh or Corinne, do you want to weigh in on how grantees might even begin to start thinking about this?
Sure, this is Corinne. I would say that the organization that Caleb was highlighting before, the Job Accommodation Network, is a really excellent place to start. They are really, they're a wonderful resource. They are a nonpartisan organization that was created actually when the ADA was created to help both employers and employees navigate what is an accommodation, what is an individual need, and they are great. You can reach them phone, chat, and they will give really targeted advice. They do larger trainings, but they're a really wonderful place to start, as are the ADA centers. Everybody has a regional ADA center. Again, great, free, confidential advice is available through them. So that's where I would start.
And I would follow up with that saying, naturally, the vocational rehabilitation offices that are located in each state, those are run by states rather than a national entity. So here in California, it's the Department of Rehabilitation, or DOR, and there are offices across the state in every region. And those, as we talked about, are required partners of WIOA. So certainly being in touch with the local one-stop centers or American Job Centers, AJCs, which are also located in each community locally as well. They will have contacts and relationships with vocational rehabilitation. And VR can oftentimes provide resources, training. They can provide access to potential candidates. They can provide support for students who may be going through your programs or wanting to go through the programs if they are also consumers of Voc Rehab. If they're enrolled in Voc Rehab, then Voc Rehab may be able to provide assistive technology to support those individuals to use personal equipment and technology to participate in the program more effectively as well. So those can be valuable resources.
Excellent. Thank you. And I just want to say thank you again to Ethos, to Josh and Corinne for providing such excellent information and for sharing the resources that you've developed. CAI grantees, please take advantage of these. Please visit their website and see if it can improve your grant program. And thank you to Caleb as well for providing this California-specific perspective on some of these issues. As I said, we'd love to stay in touch, and so when we follow up if this in the CAI newsletter and on CAI's Facebook Workplace page, we'll include these slides and also an opportunity to stay connected. So thank you to everybody who joined us today. Thank you to our panelists. Happy and safe holidays to everyone. But I think we're wrapped. Thank you guys again.
Thank you, Jesse.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you, Caleb.
Yeah, thanks so much both and everybody on the call today. Really appreciate it.
All right.